to participate in that in 2011. And obviously, with everything that's going on in the world at the moment, like everything and everyone else, we are now on Zoom rather than together in person. But we're delighted to have two very good panelists to welcome back Richard and Triago after 9 years. And we also have Minerva Figueroa here to speak about, I suppose, what's happening in Latin America really in the midst of this crisis, what sorts of other issues, related to the economy, but also related to societies in Latin America, what's going on in those places. We've heard, I suppose, some of the headlines relating, strictly speaking, to the direct impact of COVID-19. But probably getting less insight, those of us who are not living in the region, certainly about what's happening on the ground in marginalized neighborhoods, in what's happening in terms of women and children, what's happening in terms of peasant and indigenous communities. So that's sort of part of what we're, I suppose, hoping to get a bit of insight into with this session today. So my name is Chris O'Connell, and I've been involved in LASC for quite a long time now, over 10 years, and I'm also a postdoctoral researcher based in Dublin City University in Ireland. So I just wanted, I suppose, quickly to give a little bit of the overview of what's maybe taking place in the region, and highlight a couple of the issues that people are starting to talk about as a sort of way to introduce then more specific talks that we're going to hear after that. So in terms of the pandemic, strictly speaking, or the health crisis that the pandemic has brought, Latin America is starting to be spoken about now, I think, in the last week or so as the new epicenter of coronavirus. The one country that was sort of ahead a little bit was Ecuador, where Richard is based, and where I lived before, and particularly the city of Guayaquil, where again Richard is based, and where I used to live, was very hard hit. And there were some very shocking images of bodies in the streets there, and now more recently, there are figures coming out of particularly Mexico and Brazil are pretty worrying, and may well be underreported. So all of that is knocking on, and the main response to that, so I suppose particularly Brazil, and to a lesser extent maybe Mexico, it appears that the governments have maybe been slow to react, or have not taken the virus very seriously. In other countries they have, in Ecuador they did, but the main response for many countries, and there's a variation, has been a fairly strict lockdown or curfew. So in Ireland we talk about lockdown, still able to get out quite a bit. In other countries it's been much more stricter, and that's partly because the sort of health systems and the health services there are much weaker, and particularly for those who are more marginalized. And that's really brought up the second big issue, which is the issue of informality. So the International Labour Organization, the ILO, just a few days ago put out a press release about the issue, referring basically to the issue facing many people, in particularly informal workers around the world. 1.6 billion formal workers, but around about 50% of the workforce in Latin America is working informally, and saying that many people in those areas, particularly under lockdown, face a choice between contagion or starvation, and that's so. The solution, or a big part of the solution to the pandemic, to the virus, the lockdown, is also bringing many problems of its own. There's a lack of access to food, there's a lack of ability to get out and get food and medicines, and so this is another big issue that's facing people certain level of non-conditional cash transfers, sort of state payments, have gone out, have increased over the last years, but there isn't across the region, there isn't a proper functioning social welfare system that people in some countries, at least in Europe, might be familiar with. So, there's an estimation that two-thirds of children in Latin America live in households that do not have access to any sort of social safety net. So that brings into, I think, play very much the vulnerability of children and women in relation to the social aspects of the virus. Obviously, we know elderly people or people with health conditions are most vulnerable to the virus, but there are other vulnerable groups then in terms of the social impacts that are happening. And then there's the macroeconomic situation that all of this is happening within. Which was already, not particularly great. So, people were watching what was happening in Latin America over the sort of 6 months to a year prior to the virus. We saw, extended protests in Ecuador, extended protests in Colombia, huge protests in Chile, a coup, and then a lot of violence, pre and especially post the coup in Bolivia. So a lot of issues, and not some at least, was related to economic slowdown in the region, and that's looking like it's going to get a lot worse. So CEPAL or ECLAC, the part of the United Nations that analyzes Latin America, is predicting the biggest economic contraction possibly, well, they say ever, but I think really what they mean is at least since 1930, following the Great Depression. And talk about large rises in unemployment, and the region as a whole contracting by more than economies contracting by more than 5%. And so there's very up to maybe 16 million people falling into extreme poverty. So there's a very serious wider context to all of the impact in Latin America. And then the last thing, I suppose, is people are also looking at the political situation, what is going to happen there. As I said, there was always quite a bit of instability and protest happening before it. Obviously, that's in the main suspended now, but particularly because a lot of the response to the coronavirus, as I mentioned, has been lockdowns, been some quite heavy policing or even militarized lockdowns. So there's an issue around human rights and possibly some sort of authoritarianism in certain parts. And then there are some evidence as well of some countries, particularly Brazil, where governments may be allowing other parties to take advantage of this coronavirus, particularly miners entering into the Amazon region, and deforestation taking place when nobody is looking, if you like. So all of these are the broader context of what's happening in the region in and around the coronavirus. So we're going to hear, I suppose, about two countries, but the analysis may go more broader, a bit broader than that, but specifically about what's happening in Ecuador and in Colombia in that respect. So we're going to have our two speakers. Richard Intriago will speak first, and then we'll have Minerva. We're going to give Richard a little bit more time because he's speaking Spanish, and Thomas will be translating, so it'll take a little bit longer. And then when Richard finishes, we'll go straight into Minerva's talk, and we will have then time for questions and answers at the end. There is, I am told, at the bottom of the Zoom window there, a tab that says Q&A. So if you would like to put a question in, and that would be the ideal thing to put that in, and then I can refer those questions on. If you have it for a particular speaker, maybe say who you're directing the question at. Otherwise, I'll ask both our panelists. And also then just a last bit of Zoom housekeeping, if you could maybe make sure that your microphones are muted during the panelists' talks. So I think that's hopefully about all. And Alba will be here helping with with the chat if there's anything specifically for her. So without much further ado then, I'm going to just introduce Richard Intriego. Richard is one of the leaders of FECAL, which is also known as the Movimiento Nacional Campesino, the national peasant movement in Ecuador. And Richard is also an organic farmer in himself, but if he has any time for that anymore, I'm not sure. And just to top it off, Richard also has a PhD in agroecology from the Universidad de Antioquia in Colombia. So very happy to welcome Richard to this panel. As I said, Richard spoke at Latin America Week in Ireland back in 2011 around issues of food sovereignty and very much still relevant to his work today. So without further ado then, thank you, Richard.
Bueno, muchas gracias, Chris, y muchas gracias a LASC por abrir este espacio, que creo que es muy importante para dar a conocer las cosas que vienen ocurriendo en nuestros países.
So hi everybody, this is Thomas. I'm going to be translating for Richard. Richard just introducing himself. Thanks, Chris, and thanks LASC for creating this space for sharing what's going on in the region.
Yo estoy en Ecuador, yo soy de Ecuador y vivo muy cerca de la ciudad de Guayaquil, que es donde ha habido el impacto más importante del COVID-19.
I'm in Ecuador. I'm from Ecuador. I live near the city of Guayaquil, which is where some of the worst impacts of COVID-19 have been felt.
Y yo quisiera reivindicar el papel de nuestro país porque ha habido una muy mala imagen nacida del manejo del gobierno nacional en la pandemia, principalmente en esta ciudad, lo que ha traído catástrofes históricas para nuestro país.
I thought it was important to talk about what's happening in our country. There's been the story that's been shared, or the image that's been shown internationally is a really terrible image due to how the crisis has been managed by the government.
Hay que saber que muchas de las cosas que se han evidenciado en el mundo de lo que está sucediendo en Guayaquil son ciertas.
It's important to underline that almost all of what has been seen internationally in terms of what is happening in Guayaquil is true.
Hay muchos, los datos oficiales del gobierno nacional no tienen nada que ver con la realidad que estamos viviendo en Ecuador.
The official information being used and shared by the government is very far removed from the reality that we're living in Ecuador.
Justo ahora, el gobierno nacional habla que hay 30.500 casos de pacientes confirmados con COVID en todo el país, 30.500, y hay 2.300 muertes, lo cual es mentira.
The government is saying that right now there are 30,500 cases of COVID-19, people with COVID-19, and there have been 2,300 deaths. This is a lie.
Solo en la provincia del Guayas hoy podría estar teniendo más de 18.000 muertes por COVID.
Just in the province of Guayas, there could be approximately 18,000 dead from COVID.
Pero hay que diferenciar lo que el mal manejo de la pandemia de parte de un gobierno que ahora no lo tenemos, que no está actuando frente a este problema, con las acciones desde la organización social que se han venido dando para poder enfrentar la crisis.
It's important to differentiate between the really bad management of the government of the crisis and the non-action of the government, in contrast to the actions of social organizations that have been taking action on the ground.
Una de las cosas importantes que hay que saber es que en el países como el nuestro, no se puede ver exactamente cuántos enfermos de COVID tenemos, porque no tenemos ni siquiera las pruebas suficientes para realizarlas. Así que hay mucha gente enferma en casa sin saber que tiene COVID.
It's really important to understand that in countries like Ecuador, we can't see how many people are sick because we don't have the testing capacity. So there are lots of people who are sick at home, and these cases haven't been documented.
Más adelante vamos a hablar sobre las acciones que las organizaciones sociales en el país estamos llevando a cabo, reemplazando o haciendo lo que el gobierno no ha hecho para poder enfrentar la pandemia desde la sociedad civil.
Later, I'm going to share with you some of the action being taken by social organizations in the absence of the government in facing the impacts of COVID-19.
Pero ahora hay que entender algunos temas básicos de nuestros países. No es lo mismo hablar de una cuarentena en Europa que hablar de una cuarentena en América Latina.
But first, it's important to understand a few basic things about countries like Ecuador. It's very different to be talking about a quarantine in Europe and to be talking about a quarantine in Ecuador.
Solo imaginemos por un momento la campaña mundial de quédate en casa para evitar el contagio.
Even if we just look at the global campaign to stay at home, the global stay at home campaign as a way of containing the spread of COVID-19.
Un país como Ecuador, cuando le dicen quédate en casa por meses, cuando sabemos que el 80% de la población, por lo menos, tiene que vivir con su trabajo diario o tiene que salir a poder ganarse los reales que le sirvan para la alimentación de su familia, es imposible mantenerse en casa.
When we think about these measures in the context of a country like Ecuador, where people are being asked to stay at home, in Ecuador, 80% of people make a living day to day and depend on going out to work every day to earn enough food to feed their families.
O sea que en nuestro país le dicen a la gente pobre, o sales o mueres por COVID, o te quedas en casa y mueres de hambre. Elige.
So in countries like Ecuador, poor people are faced with either staying at home and dying from hunger or going out on the streets and dying from COVID.
Entonces vemos mucha gente en las calles, ancianos, los de más riesgo, vendiendo frutas o vendiendo cualquier cosa diaria que les permita sobrevivir, pero del hambre, no de la pandemia.
So what we see is a lot of people on the streets, a lot of some older people, some of the most vulnerable, most at-risk people, doing things like selling fruit on the street to make sort of basic, just to earn a basic income.
Y hay datos que entender para sensibilizar a la población mundial de lo que está sucediendo en Guayas. Solo como un dato importante, en Guayas, hoy por hoy, no hay una sola persona que no tenga un familiar fallecido, un amigo o compañero de trabajo de la organización, en nuestro caso, que haya fallecido por causa del COVID. Todos conocemos por lo menos uno.
And it's important to get the word out, to share with the world, even in the context of the city Guayas today, where not one person, there's not one person who doesn't have a family member or a friend or a colleague from social organizations, as in our case, who has doesn't know somebody who has died from COVID-19.
Ahora, a pesar de eso, y que somos uno de los países más golpeados del mundo por la pandemia, seremos probablemente el primer país en levantar las restricciones y la cuarentena. Es una contradicción que el gobierno está planteando.
Despite this, and despite being one of the countries worst hit by the pandemic, what we're seeing is the government beginning that the country will be one of the first to lift the restrictions and the quarantine, and there's a major contradiction in this.
Es importante también conocer que al inicio de la pandemia, todos los funcionarios públicos fueron los primeros en ir a cuarentena. Y les hablamos de alcaldes, prefectos, presidentes de juntas parroquiales, gobierno nacional, todos estaban en cuarentena primeros. Entonces, ¿quién atendía el país? ¿Quién tomaba decisiones?
It's important to know that at the start of the quarantine, it was public officials, including mayors, local government officials, and even national level members of parliament were the first to go into quarantine. So who has been making the decisions while that's been happening?
El país quedó desamparado, sin dirección política, sin liderazgo, pero además de eso, con un sistema de salud colapsado, porque nuestro sistema de salud pública es muy pobre, porque se han encargado de fortalecer los sistemas de salud privados.
So the country has been left unprotected without political leadership, and the health system is in collapse. We had a very poor public health system to begin with, because it's the private health system that has been strengthened in recent times.
Solo como un dato importante, en la actualidad, todos los que fueron culpables de la catástrofe que vivió el país, estoy hablando del gobierno nacional y todos sus aliados, ahora están alejándose del gobierno y están haciendo leña del árbol caído. Ahora todos culpan al gobierno y todos renuncian a sus cargos y se están alejando y alistándose para las próximas elecciones.
It's important to know that all of these people who are responsible for this mismanagement of the crisis are abandoning a sinking ship and are trying to distance themselves from the current government and try to reposition themselves for future elections.
Dentro de todo esto hay una desesperación por levantar la cuarentena que viene por una presión de las grandes empresas, quienes están perdiendo mucho por su inactividad. Entonces, tenemos un gobierno desesperado por la economía empresarial, pero no por la economía local, por la economía familiar.
So in all of this, those who are most desperate to lift the quarantine are the big companies, the big economic interests in the country who are losing a lot of money. And it's the government who that is prioritizing their concerns and not those of people working in family economy, sort of more the local economy. People were actors in the local economy.
Es importante saber que en medio de la pandemia se ha promovido el pago de deuda externa ecuatoriana cuando no tenemos recursos en el país para colocarlos en el tema sanitario. Se ha dejado sin trabajo a cientos de trabajadores en el gobierno nacional se está reduciendo, ahora justo estamos en ese conflicto, el presupuesto para los estudiantes universitarios, principalmente.
So in the middle of this, in the middle of the pandemic, the foreign debt is being paid. This is at a time when the government is without money to invest in health, where hundreds of government workers have been laid off, and where the education budget has decreased. So during all of this, foreign debt is being paid.
O sea, que no hay un enfoque de resolver los problemas que tenemos en términos sanitarios, sino un enfoque de poder aprovechar la pandemia para colocar algunos temas claves, algunas políticas claves que no pudieron colocarse en un estado normal del país. Entre ellos, quitar el subsidio a los combustibles, que fue la causa del paro de octubre del año pasado.
So the focus of the government hasn't been on health. The focus in the country has rather been on taking advantage of the crisis to implement key policies that couldn't be implemented at normal times. An example of this has been the removal of the subsidy on oil and gas, which that was a major cause of the strike in October of last year in Ecuador.
Dentro de todo esto, desde la organización campesina en el país, habíamos previsto que no solamente habría una catástrofe sanitaria, porque conocemos las condiciones de nuestro país, sino que también íbamos a tener una catástrofe alimentaria. Y hoy estamos en una crisis sanitaria, alimentaria, económica y política.
So in the midst of all of this, as campesino, small farmer organizations, it was clear to us that it wasn't just going to be a health catastrophe, but it was also going to be a food catastrophe. So today in the country, we're facing a health catastrophe, a food catastrophe, and an economic and political catastrophe.
La ONU, hace ya casi 2 semanas, mencionó que el mundo se encuentra a las puertas de una catástrofe alimentaria de repercusiones bíblicas. Eso es muy serio. Y nosotros sabíamos que podía ocurrir en Ecuador también.
The UN 2 weeks ago stated that the world was on the verge of a food collapse and of biblical proportions. And in Ecuador, we are also seeing that.
Porque para pueblos como los nuestros, la pandemia es una cosa menor cuando hablamos de un desabastecimiento alimentario, tal como ocurrió en estas semanas anteriores.
Because in countries like ours, the pandemic is a secondary concern whenever we're faced with food shortages like those we've seen in recent weeks.
Entonces hay que saber una cosa importante, por lo menos para países agropecuarios. Nuestro país es netamente agropecuario y ahora que cayó el precio del petróleo, lo único que nos queda a nosotros para fortalecer la economía es levantar el sector agropecuario con mucha fuerza.
Something really important here is that for food producing countries like ours, now that oil prices have collapsed, and the only thing left is to lift up the food producing sector.
El COVID no es lo mismo en la realidad de la ciudad y del campo. En la realidad del campo tenemos muchos menos problemas que los que surgen en la ciudad.
COVID is not the same in the city as it is in the countryside. In the countryside, we have a lot less problems, a lot fewer problems.
Por esa misma razón, ha habido una migración importante de familias que han querido irse a proteger al campo y también muchos cierres de carreteras y de vías que hasta ahora están bloqueadas por montubios, indígenas, afroecuatorianos, los pueblos y nacionalidades, protegiendo que no entren personas de las ciudades a sus territorios.
For this reason, there's been a lot of internal migration. People trying to return to the countryside, and what we're seeing is road closures and blockages or blockades of the roads by indigenous peoples trying to protect their territories from people coming from the cities.
Tomando por ellos mismos las medidas de protección para poder desinfectar a todos los carros y personas que ingresen a sus comunidades y además decidiendo quién entra y quién no.
Taking it upon themselves to introduce protective measures such as disinfecting cars and people and deciding themselves who enters and who doesn't enter.
Y en esta pandemia se han desnudado muchas cosas. Lo primero es que tenemos un sistema capitalista neoliberal, principalmente en ciudades como la de Guayaquil, que no están viendo al ser humano como el principal eje del desarrollo de la ciudad.
The pandemic has revealed a lot of things, including the way it has revealed the neoliberal capitalist model that we have in cities like Guayaquil, where the human being is not the priority or the focus of development.
Y por otro lado, sucedió una cosa muy interesante. El sector campesino, y hablo de los pequeños y medianos productores, los que producimos el alimento para este país, han pasado de ser un sector discriminado en el país mucho por décadas a ser héroes ahora frente a la pandemia.
And on the other hand, what we're seeing, something really important that we're seeing, is that small farmers, small and medium-sized food producers that produce the food for the country, have gone from being a sector of the population that face discrimination to being heroes.
Y hablamos de familias sencillas del campo, las más pobres, porque son ellas quienes producen el alimento. Hablamos de que no tienen políticas públicas adecuadas, permanentemente persiguen sus tierras, no tienen agua para el riego, ni créditos oportunos, pero son ellos y ellas quienes están enfrentando ahora el problema alimentario en el Ecuador.
We're talking about poor families, simple poor families from the countryside, people who produce food, and these are communities that don't have policies for example, local water services or access to local credit, but they're the ones that are leading the response to the COVID pandemic.
Con esa fuerza, entonces, el sector campesino nacional, más otras organizaciones importantes como los trabajadores del transporte, como los educadores populares, como grupos de mujeres y de barrios, hemos levantado 2 brigadas, una brigada alimentaria y una brigada de salud.
So based on this strength from these communities, workers, food producers and small farmers, but also transport workers, teachers, and women. We've set up 2 brigades, one in relation to food production and one in relation to health.
Hemos llegado con flotas de camiones de alimentos a abrir centros de acopio en la ciudad, porque además el sistema alimentario, que lo manejan los mayoristas e intermediarios, elevó 3 veces el precio de los alimentos en todo el país. Y al llegar en una flota de camiones los campesinos, hemos regulado en muchas ciudades el mercado.
So what we've arrived into the cities in convoys of trucks and set up our own markets in the cities. The wholesalers or those that dominated the food system beforehand had increased food prices 3 times the normal prices. And what we have been able to do by bringing food into the cities is to regulate the market.
Y eso es economía básica, es oferta y demanda. Si nosotros entramos con mucho alimento, con precios 3 veces menores, el mercado tiene que moverse, tiene que bajarse. Si el mercado no baja sus precios, nosotros posicionamos un mercado fuerte del sector campesino que va a comenzar a abastecer alimento a todas las ciudades.
This is basic economics, basic supply and demand. If we're bringing in lots of food into the cities at prices 3 times less, the general price of food has to go down. If they don't, we'll set up parallel markets and supply food to the cities ourselves.
5
El
minutos,
siguiente
por favor,
propósito que
Richard.
tenemos en
5
estos
minutos.
días es abrir 1000 boticas campesinas con productos naturales en todos los barrios de Ecuador para hacer frente a la catástrofe sanitaria que estamos viviendo.
Perdón, Richard, ¿puedes repetir esa parte, por favor?
Que lo próximo que va a ocurrir es que vamos a aperturar 1000 boticas campesinas, boticas, farmacias campesinas, con productos del campo, con plantas medicinales, con miel de abeja, con el fin de hacer frente a la catástrofe sanitaria que vivimos, que no solamente es COVID.
Perdóname un rato, Thomas, la interrupción. Richard, 5 minutos, por favor, o más rápido si puedes. Gracias.
Okay.
What's going to happen next is that what's going to happen next is that we're going to set up small farmer-led pharmacies based on natural medicine. And we're going to do this as a way of confronting COVID, but not only COVID, but all of the other health problems that the country faces.
En general, lo que quiero comunicar es que esta pandemia en el país ha sido enfrentada por las organizaciones sociales, por los trabajadores de la salud, que ya han muerto muchos, por los trabajadores del campo, por los trabajadores del transporte. O sea, la unidad de las organizaciones sociales está logrando hacer frente a la catástrofe que vivimos.
So in general, what I want to communicate to you today is that the pandemic in Ecuador is being faced or dealt with by social organizations, by health workers, by transport workers, and it's the unity across these sectors that has allowed us to deal with the impacts of the pandemic.
Así que lo que se escuchaba de nuestro país, y principalmente de la ciudad de Guayaquil, en el mundo, es cierto. Pero lo que no se ha escuchado es todo el trabajo coordinado en alianzas que fuera del gobierno nacional estamos haciendo las organizaciones sociales del campo y de la ciudad para poder enfrentar la pandemia.
And what has been heard about Ecuador internationally, particularly about the city of Guayaquil, is true. But what is not being heard is the coordinated work outside of the government by social organizations and the way that we are taking on responsibility for the pandemic.
Así que la lección más grande para nosotros como ecuatorianos es que este sistema donde vivimos no puede ir más, que debemos migrar hacia un nuevo sistema alimentario, sanitario, social, ambiental y político que priorice al ser humano y a la naturaleza dentro de todo el desarrollo.
The major lesson for us is that this system that we live in can't continue. We need to move towards a new system, a new food, health, social, environmental, and political system that places human beings and nature at the center of all development.
Quiero insistir, por último, que hemos pasado de ser un mal ejemplo para el mundo a causa del gobierno nacional a un gran ejemplo de solidaridad, amor al prójimo y unidad entre el campo y la ciudad.
Finally, I just want to emphasize that Ecuador has gone from being a bad example of government mismanagement to being a good example of solidarity, of unity between the city and the countryside, and of loving your fellow man.
Y se lo garantizamos como organizaciones sociales, que ahora estamos al frente de un problema serio en el país, que sabemos que hemos perdido familias, amigos, que hemos además sufrido mucho en esta pandemia, pero les garantizamos que así como hemos hecho una fuerza nacional para enfrentar la pandemia, también diremos que esto nunca más pasará en Ecuador.
And what we want to, as social organizations, guarantee you, we, all of us, have lost friends and families as a result of the COVID pandemic. But we want to guarantee you through our efforts that this will not happen again in Ecuador.
Muchas gracias a todos por escuchar y estoy atento a las preguntas y comentarios que quieran realizar.
Thank you for everybody. Thank you to everybody for listening, and I'll be here for questions and answers later.
Muchísimas gracias, Richard. Thank you very much, Richard, and thank you also to Thomas for that interpretation. And so, as was mentioned there, and as at the start, we can take questions. I think throughout this process, through the tab at the bottom, but we will answer the questions or put the questions to the panelists at the end. And so now we're going to hear from Minerva Figueroa. So Minerva is from Colombia, but living in Germany, where she's trained in medicine. And Minerva is a member of the Red de Iniciativas Comunitarias, the network of community initiatives in Colombia that engage in a variety of solidarity work and campaigns, much of it relating to the impacts of extractive industries such as coal mining and others. And I think, as was mentioned maybe at the start, but we can recap it again later. But for those interested in that specific topic of coal mining, that there's a campaign related to LASC, Stop Blood Coal, that might be of interest. But without further ado, I'd like to pass over to Minerva to give us her talk. Thank you, Minerva.
Yeah, thank you, Chris. Gracias, Richard, por tu intervención. Yeah, hello, and thanks for coming to hear us. I do live in Germany. I came back from Colombia about probably a month ago. Was there for 5 or 6 months. Yeah, I think that Richard already said a lot about the situation. Although there are different countries, the situation in a lot of Latin American countries is the same. Probably gonna talk about a little bit about he talked about the informal economy. So for example, informal economy in Colombia is 60% of all employed people. So that's like an important factor when you're thinking about the economical impact of the quarantine situation that you're having. And also to give you, he talked about the precariousness of our health system, but just to give you an idea of it, in Colombia it's a 50 million people country, but you have 5,000 ICU beds. So it's kind of a different thing, because when people get sick, they don't go to the doctor because they're not insured, because you're not going to get the attention that you need. So a lot of people that die are dying at home. Also, he talked about the under registry. So we don't have enough tests. You don't get a test if you're not private, if you don't have private insurance. So it's kind of a different situation if you compare it to Europe or to other places in the global north. Also, and another topic that it's really, really important to keep in mind is that we have another health crisis going on right now in Latin America, and it's the domestic violence and violence against women. So Latin America is the most dangerous place in the world for women. And this quarantine has shot up the domestic violence cases, but 20 to 40 to maybe 50% in some places. So when we already had a problem with femicides and domestic violence and violence against women, and now they are all holed up with their aggressors in their homes. So you have the pandemic crisis, the coronavirus crisis going on, and then you have the domestic violence, the killings against women, the violations, the rapes, all concentrated into one problem. Also, as Richard already said, our economies are very dependent on raw resources, so oil, coal, mining products like bauxite, like aluminium, like all that stuff. And that was already going down before the pandemic, so we were already approaching an economic crisis. And now with the oil prices so low, then you have like it's three crises going together. And also there's another problem when you have this one-sided approach from the pandemic. So all those health recommendations that you hear from the World Health Organization, all the health ministries, they're really for the urban European person, right? So wash your hands constantly, don't go out, quarantine yourself, don't have contact with other persons. But they don't consider that a lot of people, a lot of communities in Latin America, in Colombia, they lead a community life. So for them, isolating themselves, it's not an option. It's part of how they live, it's part of who they are. And most of them, a lot of people in Colombia don't have access to running water. So all these recommendations on how to contain the pandemic, they are not thought for people outside of the global north. So this was also a problem that hit our countries, because you cannot say to a person who lives in community and who their community is the most important thing, yeah, isolate yourself. That's not going to work. This is not how those communities function. So this is some considerations that you have to keep in mind when thinking the pandemic outside of the global north, and the economic impact, the domestic violence crisis, the economic crisis because of the dependence on the resources that are not being consumed right now by the global north, and also the one-sidedness of reports and recommendations. So Where is our position and where is our work in that? So before the pandemic, we, as Chris already said, we were working with cooperating with different communities on extractivism, and not only that, but our name is Network of Community Initiatives because we believe in the self-determination and autonomy of the community. So for example, the peace network that Richard was talking about, from those kinds of initiatives, our countries are full of. And why? Because after years and years of state neglect and violent extractivism, those people have been forced to join in cooperativeness, in solidarity and resistance. So what we tried to do was, from the Latin American diaspora in Europe and in other places, try to not only visualize them, but also support them in an eye-to-eye relationship. So it started with a couple of people here in Europe, and then it expanded to our places, so where we come from. So yes, we have people in Colombia, but we also have people in Venezuela and Guatemala, because yes, they are different countries, but Latin America is just one, it's Abya Yala. So this is what we try to do, and we try to build an alternative for what you would usually call developmental aid, which is not. But our goal is sometimes in the future that people like us, who have the relationships, who have maybe an economic advantage, who are not, maybe in the future are not going to be needed, because then we would have built like a web of solidarity between the communities in the territories in Latin America. We combine this with political activism here in the global north, and we have what we like to call a decolonial approach, meaning that we like to do a political statement that in all the knowledge that we try to perceive, most of them comes from the territories in resistance, meaning that we try to learn from them as much as we can, from their praxis, from their lived experience, and not so much from the theory that's produced in the universities of the global north. Not, don't take that in a bad way, no. What else, what I'm talking about? Oh yeah, so the communities that we work right now are in La Guajira and El Cesar. This is the mining corridor of Colombia. They produce mostly hard coal that is exported to the global north, and right now also to Turkey and Mexico. But the Cesar region, they have produced coal mostly for Germany and the United States for the past 30 to 40 years. Also, another thing that you have to consider while considering the pandemic right now in Colombia is that we have well, now they say that we don't have a civil war anymore, which is not true. We have a violence wave going on against community leaders since the new president took office in 2018. More than 260 leaders, community leaders, environmental defenders, human rights defenders have been killed, and many more are threatened. And it has also not stopped during the pandemic. So all these things have come together to make a very, very difficult image of the situation right now in Colombia. And if you take into consideration the communities that we are working right now in the coal mining regions, they also have a higher desertification rate, so they don't have, in so many cases, they don't have drinking water, water to wash your hands. They have a very high informality rate because a lot of the economy in the region is depending on coal, and they have one of the highest rate of respiratory illnesses due to the air pollution that the coal mining causes. So this makes the image of the pandemic in the coal regions so much more harder to grasp, maybe. And also the state is non-existent in these regions. So you have no health ministry. You will have maybe in La Guajira, which is probably as big as the Netherlands, you will have 2 ICU beds. There is no subsidies. If you have to stay home, then you will get no money from the government. You were already probably in an informal situation, so you have no place to go to get food. And this is where what Richard was saying about either you go out and get COVID or you die of hunger. So this is the situation, and right now what is happening is a lot like it is happening in Ecuador, that solidarity networks are popping up everywhere. And what we are trying to do, and you could support our work, is because of the relationships that we already had with these communities, because of all the work that we were trying to do before. Then we said, okay, let's sit down and let's work out something that maybe we can put up in the long run. So for example, with a with a community in Provincial, which is like 200 meters of the coal pit in the northern region of Colombia, they were lacking food. So okay, let's set up a crowdfunding, and then they were saying, okay, no, maybe yes, we can do a little bit about this, but we want to play it in the long run. So okay, don't buy us eggs, but buy us a chicken or whatever, so we can put up that stuff into our long run. And I think that this is a very important thing when you are talking about how do you develop the so-called aid projects with any other community, is that mostly what happens is that the aid agency comes and says, already, I need this and this and this goal, and I need this and this and this for my report. And then the community has no say in the stuff that they need, right? They don't have any kind of determination on how the money is spent. So I think this is a mistake, and this is what we try to change, that these people have as much say in how we use the resources, how we get the resources, how the discourse is made, as we do, without forgetting power relationships that may be at place. So I don't know how much time do I have. Yeah, okay. And for example, also what we also try to do, and this is another initiative that we have in Cesar, which is also a coal mining region in Colombia, this time really hit by state and paramilitary violence, is that we try to support local, how do you call it, like local producers. So for example, they their problem was a little bit different from La Guajira. They didn't have any drinking water, and they said, okay, maybe we can work something out. And so we found this, well, I used to know a Colombian company that built artisanal water filters from an ancestral technology. Ancestral meaning originary from Colombia. And we got in touch with them, and we said, okay, we are a collective of people who are working with this community, and they need the water filters. So they say, okay, we know how the situation is right now, we can give you the 250 filters for the families that you need, and you can pay us the half of it when you get the money. And this is something that that in Colombia it's really, really hard to grasp, because people, it's not like this company has 20 million to go on with it. I mean, they need the money to produce them, they need the money to pay for their employees. So this is a sign of solidarity as big as you can get right now. And what the community did then was send a lot of food then back with the truck that took the water filters to a poor neighborhood in Cali, the place where the filters are produced. So this is just one example of 1,000 of solidarity examples that are popping up everywhere in Colombia. There's also a network that is just like the one Richard described, which is just the idea is to take the produce that is the food that is produced on the fields directly to the consumers with no intermediaries, and also to bypass all the bureaucracy of the subsidies of the government, which are going straight to the big producers who produce not food, but they produce corn for biofuel, they produce soy, and they produce palm oil. So I think my point is that because of the absence of the state actually in Colombia for a long, long time, and not only the absence, but also its outright criminality against everything that defends life and defends the people itself, there was already a big movement coming that allowed all of these solidarity initiatives to exist and to show itself right now. I don't think that this is going to be the last pandemic that we live, and I think that if we don't use this opportunity right now to build more resilient structures, more autonomous, more alternative structures to this capitalist, sexist, destructive system that we have here, I don't think that then we would be able to resist all the crises that are coming our way. And this is also, I think it applies for Germany, it applies for Ireland, it applies for the whole of Europe, because well, the life here is completely dependent on the resources that you get from our countries. So if these countries really collapse, if the oil industries, the coal industry, if all the industries that this lifestyle is based on collapse, then our life here is going to collapse as well. So I think that this pandemic has shown to the global north what the people in the global south have been saying all along, and that is, if we don't stop deforestation, if we don't stop coal mining, if we don't stop global warming, yada yada, then our life as we know it is going to end. And it is, I think, 5 minutes. Okay. 2 minutes? Okay, I'm done. I'm actually done. I can stop now. But yeah, I think that the solidarity examples are just a show that another world is really possible, that another form of communicating and relating to each other is really possible, and also that virtuality can be a tool for that. And with that, I am done.
Muchísimas gracias. Thank you, Minerva. That was great. And I'd just also like to say a thank you to Karen, who I think is in New York, if I'm not mistaken, who I'm not sure if everyone has the chat window open, but Karen has been valiantly translating Minerva's presentation in text as well, which is very impressive, into Spanish for anyone that is listening and doesn't speak English. So thank you very much for that. That's really very valuable and an example of solidarity right there. So if we could maybe get the panelists back on to look at some of the questions that have come in. I'm not sure if Richard is there. So yeah, I'm just looking through. There's a few questions, and I'm going to read them out. So there's several questions that are for both I think Minerva and Richard. I'm going to read through them in English, and then I'm going to do my best to read them through in Spanish or translate them into Spanish, and then give each panelist a few minutes to respond. How are we doing for time, Alba? We're okay for another bit yet, are we?
Yes, we already have 45 more minutes, so we are okay.
So we'll take these. There are a few questions from the one questioner, Alberto. So I'll sort of try to put them together a little bit because I think they sort of go to a similar issue really, which is the sort of the responses of the governments or the states in response to the various issues, I guess, that have been brought up through this crisis. So as I said, I'll try to go through them in English and then in Spanish for Richard's sake, and then we'll pass over, maybe just take a couple of minutes each to answer these, because there are some other questions coming in then. So basically, these questions relate to what the governments have done. So one issue is sort of, have governments used this crisis, if you like, to do anything good for the environment, to control illegal logging, we have coca leaf growing, or to benefit the environment for small farmers, to do reforestation. Similarly, have the governments intervened in supply chains in order to, I suppose, improve this or facilitate the transport of food from, if you like, we say from farm to fork. I think in Spanish maybe it's from the land to the pot. And it was mentioned that the Peruvian government have had some initiatives to do that. Likewise, has there been any special support for farmers, particularly around credits or specific financing? And there's mentioned that the Peruvian government has done something called the Programa de Compensación, and then and what is happening, I suppose, in the fields, in the countryside, are fields still being I guess are fields still being fumigated and control of diseases and so on. So I'll just try to go through these in Spanish for Richard. So durante esta cuarentena, toque de queda, el gobierno ha aprovechado de esta situación para controlar la tala ilegal de madera, o hacer reforestación, o beneficiar al medio ambiente en términos generales. Han intervenido los gobiernos en las cadenas de suministro para facilitar la entregada de comida desde el campo hacia las ciudades, como ha hecho, bueno, hay una iniciativa del gobierno peruano de la tierra a la olla. También se han hecho alguna, se están dando créditos o financiamiento para los pequeños productores. Otra vez menciono el programa de Perú, el gobierno se llama Programa de Compensación o Agroideas. Y qué está pasando dentro de los campos, y se ha seguido con el trabajo cotidiano de, bueno, aquí dice como control de plagas, etc. Entonces, esos 4 preguntas, quizás son 2 for questions sort of together. Maybe, I don't know if, who would like to go first on that. We'll leave that one to Richard to answer first, Minerva, and then go to you. Is that okay? Entonces, primero, ti, Richard, si está bien, unos, no sé, 3 minutos quizás cada uno, 3 minutes each. Okay.
Sí, gracias. Gracias, Chris. Muchas gracias, Minerva, por tu presentación también. A ver, lo primero es sobre el gobierno. El gobierno ecuatoriano ha aprovechado esta situación. Hola, ¿me escuchan? Ya. El gobierno ecuatoriano ha aprovechado esta situación, sí, pero la ha aprovechado en contra del sector popular. O sea, para profundizar las medidas económicas que en un momento normal no lo pudo hacer, para avanzar con la minería a gran escala en diferentes sectores, debido a que no pueden haber protestas o la gente no quiere salir a protestas por temor, y para fortalecer los supermercados antes que la producción campesina. ¿Sigo o eso va a ser traducido?
Lo traduzco, Richard. Gracias. So thanks, Chris.
Gracias.
Thanks, Chris, and thanks to Minerva. Yes, the first question about the Ecuadorian government. Yes, the Ecuadorian government has taken advantage of the crisis, but it has done so against the interests of the popular sectors. It has done so to deepen the unpopular economic measures, and in a way, like for example, large-scale mining at a time when it's not possible to go out and protest. And they're also doing it in a way that strengthen supermarkets and the industrial food system against the interests of small-scale farming.
Precisamente en el tema alimentario, sacó varios programas para que las donaciones vayan a supermercados y puedan entregar productos procesados y superprocesados a las familias que están en cuarentena en términos de donaciones. Y justo hoy o ayer sacó el New York Times la necesidad de poderse alimentar de manera más saludable durante esta cuarentena, que también es un problema para la salud.
Another example of this is in the whole area of food. And one of the things that the government has done is introduced a program that allows the supermarkets to use processed food for donations to families families who are observing the lockdown. This at a time today or yesterday when there was an article in the New York Times emphasizing the need to feed ourselves better during the lockdown. Yeah.
Y en este mismo ejemplo, deben saber que la corrupción se ha profundizado en la pandemia. Es una cosa única lo que ha sucedido en nuestro país. O sea, han elevado precios de fundas de muertos, de cadáveres, han elevado muertos de estas mismas raciones alimenticias, las han puesto por $150, cuando realmente han costado $80. Pero en una relación con una ración alimenticia del campo, hubiesen costado $25. O sea, alrededor de todo esto, además, hay corrupción de los funcionarios públicos.
And another thing that's happening is that corruption is getting worse. This is possibly unique to Ecuador, and one of the examples of this is that the price of coffins has increased a lot, and in addition to that, food rations have increased So the price of a ration of food is, quizás Richard puedes como explicar lo que se quiere decir una ración de comida, lo que
Una canasta alimentaria de productos diversificados.
Okay, so like a basket of like a mix of different types of food is being sold for $150 when before it was $80, and in the countryside this would be going for $25. So corruption is also a big part of what's happening in Ecuador.
Por último, la segunda pregunta, respondiendo a la segunda pregunta, el campo no ha dejado de producir. El sector campesino sigue trabajando con mucha fuerza y eso ha mantenido la alimentación. Eso quiere decir que el camino para la crisis que tenemos es la soberanía alimentaria como un sistema para mejorar las condiciones del país.
And finally, in response to the second question, people in the countryside haven't stopped producing food. The food producing sectors have maintained food production. And this is what this makes very clear, is that the pathway out of the crisis is food sovereignty as a model, to improve the conditions in the country.
Okay. Gracias.
Gracias, Richard.
Thank you.
Minerva, would you like to respond to those questions, I suppose, about sort of the responses of the states to different aspects of the crisis?
Yeah, I mean, I think that Richard said that it was unique to Ecuador. I'm really sorry that it's not. The corruption has been rampant also in Colombia, with also this huge prices for a can of tuna. It's quite the common thing across Colombia. Also, what the Colombian government has been innovating is how to bypass our constitution regarding environmental decisions. So, for example, now they want to institute this virtual consultation. So it's not only like a territorial consultation for mining or for oil drilling. Usually you would have to call the whole community and they will come, and usually they say no. But now they are trying to make it virtual. So in a country that has, I don't know, 30% of the inhabitants have access to an internet connection, you want to make the decisions that affect them the most virtual. So this has been also a big thing that they are trying to push. Also the pension and tax reform, they pushed it through while the pandemic, or I think the tax reform not yet, but the pension reform, which was also one of the big causes that sparked the protest at the end of the year. So they have been actually taking advantage of this to push their neoliberal and right-wing agenda. And also a big thing that they are doing right now, they are trying to do this, a big movement against this, is they are trying to hurt our food sovereignty. So what they are trying to do now is taking off the taxes for corn, for imported corn, soy, and sorghum. They're also trying to get some potatoes imported from Belgium. And if we get this, then it's death for the whole potato producers of Colombia. And this is very, very important, because for about 10 years or so, Colombia was able to feed its population with produce from Colombia. And right now we have to import corn. We're importing potatoes from Germany. Why? And this is also an agenda that is being pushed by the European Union. So this is something that you have to keep in mind when talking about food sovereignty. Food sovereignty is really, I mean, fossil fuels are important, yes, but food sovereignty is the glue that holds together all the territorial and social movements right now in Latin America and also in Colombia. Because food in Latin America and corn, potatoes, all that stuff that it's autochthonous to us, it's also part of the Andean kind of thought that is keeping together all these struggles. So when Richard says that food sovereignty is the model for the future, it's because it's really, really important to connect these dots that the fossil fuel industry is closely bonded to the agro-industry. Because if you don't have gas, you don't have chemical fertilizers. If you don't have GMOs, you don't have this industry that it's responsible for the biggest climate emissions in the planet. So this is why the government is pushing this agenda so hard. It's pushing the mining consultants, it's pushing fracking, and it's pushing the genetically modified seeds into our system. Yeah, that's it.
Excellent, Minerva, thank you. Gracias, Richard, también. So I've got a couple of questions specifically for Richard and specifically for Minerva. So I'm just going to start one for Richard, and then I'll come to Minerva. And so the question is really just about wanting to know, wanting to know more about the I guess the boticas campesinas, the pharmacies, and someone also asking in particular if you know of any medicinal plants that can help to fight against the effects of coronavirus. Entonces, Richard, tengo un par de preguntas sobre las boticas campesinas para elaborar un poquito más de qué es esa iniciativa, y una pregunta específica sobre si conoces a una planta medicinal que tiene calidades que puede ayudar a soportar el virus.
Bueno, muchas gracias. A ver, el tema de las boticas campesinas es una propuesta que ya surge en una alianza mucho más fuerte en todo el país de organizaciones sociales, con el fin de dar una herramienta, un aliciente a las personas en los barrios que no tienen ni siquiera medicina convencional, porque en las farmacias falta medicina convencional. Entonces, las personas simplemente con una gripe común, probablemente no coronavirus, se echan a la cama, muy pobre, gente muy pobre, y cree que tiene coronavirus, y probablemente muere así, creyendo que lo tiene. O sea, así estamos, en esa situación. Hola.
Thank you. In terms of the boticas campesinas, the small farmer-led pharmacy initiatives, these are alliances across the country being led by social organizations, and they're basically a tool to provide some relief in neighborhoods where people don't have access to conventional medicine. The pharmacies are experiencing shortages, and there are even cases of people with symptoms that might be just basic flu symptoms going to staying in bed and thinking they have COVID and might even die like that.
Ahí nace la propuesta porque la gente está desesperanzada, sin esperanzas. Entonces ve que no tiene herramientas para defenderse. Van al mercado y no encuentran. Nuestro pueblo sabe mucho de plantas medicinales. Buscan eucalipto, buscan tomillo, buscan miel de abeja, ajo, jengibre, pero no lo encuentran. Y si lo encuentran sumamente caro. Entonces no hay herramientas para la defensa en la salud, para levantar las defensas o simplemente para hacer infusiones. Entonces la botica campesina lleva estos productos del campo para que para darles acceso a las personas que lo puedan utilizar en cada barrio.
So this proposal rose out of just this analysis that people were without hope. People were losing hope, and it was the idea is to provide a tool for people to defend themselves. People going to the markets. People in our countries know a lot about natural medicinal plants, and people are like going to the market and trying to find things like eucalyptus or thyme or honey or ginger, but there are shortages of these things, and they're really, really expensive. So the idea, people are looking for these things to help to strengthen their defenses. So the idea of the small farmer-led pharmacies is to bring these basic products into neighborhoods where people don't have access to them.
Solo con ese hecho hemos levantado el ánimo de gente en el barrio, de gente que no tiene acceso. Las personas saben cómo utilizarlas, pero ya al tenerlas a disposición hace que se sientan seguras. Es más, mentalmente, aún las plantas, sabemos que curan las plantas de muchas cosas, pero aún mentalmente hay un sentido, hay un sentimiento de que están curándose de las enfermedades. Y eso es lo positivo de las boticas campesinas, que el propósito es aperturar 1000 en todo el país.
So just by doing this, we help to lift people's spirits in the neighborhoods. People know how to use these things already, but whenever they're made available to people, people feel safe just by having them. We know that they cure people. We know that these things cure, but people feel like they're healing themselves, and that's the purpose of this initiative. And we plan to open over 1,000 of them across the country.
Gracias, Richard. Yeah. ¿Tienes más?
Solo con las plantas que curan, quiero aclarar una cosa. Bueno, no han encontrado la cura para el coronavirus. Y yo tampoco soy un médico ancestral, yo también tengo amigos de la organización que nos ayudan con eso. Pero hay plantas que curan virus, no específicamente el coronavirus, pero hay muchas plantas que curan virus. Y eso lo saben la medicina ancestral. Hay una que nos recomendaron a nosotros que se llama Artemisa. Entonces, ahora hay preparados, muchos preparados, están haciendo gárgaras con agua y sal. Bueno, hay muchas cosas que han surgido de la medicina ancestral que es para la defensa de nuestras comunidades. Muchas gracias.
We know that in terms of plants that could help to cure the coronavirus, we know that there's not yet a cure, and I'm not a natural doctor or an ancestral medicine practitioner, but we do know that there are plants that cure viruses. And one of the recommendations that has come to us is a plant called Artemisa, as one recommendation. And people are also just doing things like gargling water and salt. Yeah, that there are things coming out of ancestral or natural medicine that is helping people to defend themselves against the coronavirus. Thank you.
Gracias, Richard. Thank you, Thomas. So I have another question here, Minerva, for you. So it's a question about how you plan or hope to use the growing networks that you have been working with to empower transition in the coal producing regions. So I guess an energy transition from below is the focus of the question.
Yeah, this is actually a very interesting question, because we were actually working on this before the pandemic started. So what a lot of people, especially in the climate movement in Europe, don't know, or don't, especially in Germany. Because, for example, in Germany, they're always asking for end coal now, right? And although this would be the ideal scenario, this is something that would cause havoc in the region, right? When you have an economy that's depending 95 or 98% in some places on coal. So if we end coal now, then chaos, it is already breaking chaos in the region, but then as always happens in Colombia, it will come with violence against the people who have been resisting coal all of these years. So when you're thinking about energy transition, you have to think also on building structures in these regions that have been depending on coal for the past 40 years. Because in these regions, you don't have the resilience, you don't have food sovereignty, you don't have productive sovereignty. So how are we going to use how are we using these networks that we are building? So for example, a key thing in this whole extractivism discussion is also the gender theme, because how we relate to nature is closely related to gender relations. So that you always take nature as something that it's separate to destroy it, that it's feminine, that it's weak. And it is also not a coincidence that the highest gender violence rates in Colombia are also in these extractivist regions. So what we are proposing now with different collectives from the interior of Colombia, from Bogota, from the collectives in the extractivist regions is, okay, let's think an energy transitions that comes from the community, that comes from a communitary initiative. I'm repeating myself, but also that rethinks how we relate to nature and how we relate to women in our communities, to how we relate to the feminine thing. So I'm going to be a little more concrete into this. We are working with communities on their perspective from a new masculinity. This is a collective that's from the popular neighborhoods in Bogota, and they are working with different organizations in the coast, in the mining regions. So this could be a proposition that it would be autonomous, I mean completely not dependent on the government, and that would also come with it the profound social transformation that is needed in our societies, so that we don't see nature as something to explode, but we see nature as what the originary people see it, as a part of our community, and also with it to how to change our indifference, our relation to gender violence in the region. So there's a lot that I can say, but I don't think we have the time. So yeah, if you're interested in this project, it's really, really interesting. We're working with very, very experienced people in a lot of fields. You can just go to our website and there's a description on the project.
Okay, thank you very much, Minerva. So I have another question for Richard. I'll read it in English again, and then so I think the person who sent the question is Brazilian, because they mentioned that coronavirus has descended into, or basically split in terms of ideology in Brazil, and there's an ideological war taking place. And just specifically then for Richard, in terms of this new view that you talked about toward small farmers and the country as being heroes, do you think that this could lead to a political change, a change at the political level could it lead to people from rural areas having more power, in, I suppose, specifically in the context of Ecuador? Entonces, Richard, la pregunta viene, alguien mencionaba el contexto de Brasil, en donde el virus está como una guerra ideológica. Y la pregunta es que ese nuevo escenario en que ustedes los campesinos son considerados héroes, ¿eso va a llevar un cambio político, crees? ¿Eso puede ayudar a los pueblos rurales a obtener más poder?
Bueno, interesante pregunta, que nosotros también nos las estamos haciendo. No sabemos qué va a ocurrir. Sabemos es que aquí tenemos un gobierno debilitado y actores políticos de toda la vida muy debilitados, porque todos están escondidos y no tuvieron respuesta a la pandemia. Y quienes hemos tenido respuesta somos las organizaciones sociales del campo y de la ciudad. Entonces, eso es muy reconocido en el país, pero no sabemos si es que eso va a lograr cambios trascendentales a favor de nuestros pueblos o de nuestros sectores.
Interesting question that we're also asking ourselves. We don't know. What we do know is that we have a government that's very weak. We have a series of political actors that are also very weak, that are hidden, and that have had no response capacity to the pandemic. Those of us who have responded to the pandemic have been social organizations from the city and the countryside. We don't know if this is going to lead to deeper, more lasting changes in terms of farmers and their position in the future and the more popular sectors in general.
Lo que sí estamos seguros es que esa reivindicación del sector campesino, de este pueblo humilde que produce los alimentos, ha logrado el reconocimiento nacional, y con eso vamos a poder luchar muchas cosas como políticas públicas a favor del sector. Y por último, yo creo que hay que ir hacia una reconciliación con la naturaleza. Si no existe esa reconciliación con la naturaleza, vamos a tener catástrofes más grandes en el futuro. Gracias.
What is sure is that this sort of reivindication of the campesino sector, of the small food producing sector, and the recognition that it's given us means that we'll be able to fight for public policies in the future in favor of these sectors. And what we need to do is reconcile with nature. This is a major priority. If we don't reconcile with nature, we're headed for even bigger catastrophes in the future. Thank you.
Muchas gracias, Richard. Thanks, Thomas, again. I have one last question that I guess I'll throw out to open to both the panelists. Maybe Minerva, you might take it first. But I'll do it in English and Spanish again. So the question is about the coca industry. I'm guessing here that we're talking more about illicit than the way it is sort of semi-legalized in some places. So is the coca industry a help or a hindrance to LAC development? And how could it be better regulated to reduce the aspects of criminality? Is the question. Entonces, Richard, es la pregunta para los dos. Voy a abrirlo primero a Minerva y luego si quieres comentar. La pregunta relaciona a la industria de la coca y dice que si, pregunta si esa industria ayuda o más bien beneficia al desarrollo de América Latina y cómo se podría regularizar mejor esa industria para reducir el aspecto de la criminalidad.
Yeah, thank you, Chris. So I would like to address 2 points maybe in this question. First is the question talks about the development of Latin America. Development is a very subjective concept, and people started talking about development in maybe the 80s, maybe 60s, 70s, something like that, and it's based on a modeled development society in the global north. So when we're talking about development in Latin America, development in which side? Aside from the original people in Latin America, aside from the global north, what is development? Is development a house, a car, whatever? Or is development maybe living in harmony with the rest of the community, including non-humans? So I think that we have to maybe change a little bit our spectrum of what is development. And I really hate this word. And also the second thing is the coca industry. The coca industry first. Coca is, if you don't know, maybe coca is a very, very sacred plant for a lot of originary people in Latin America. It is used in a lot of rituals as a healing plant for some. They use it when they have. How do you call it in English? The disease that you get when you're too high in the mountains.
Altitude sickness.
Yeah, altitude sickness. Thank you very much. So they use it because it pumps up your circulatory system. And it only got to the point of commercialization when it got exported. So if you don't know, most of the coca that is produced in Colombia and Ecuador, in Brazil, it is exported to the global north. So I think you have maybe a different image of how it works. If we don't have any demand, then you don't have any production. It is also true that a lot of people and peasants in Colombia especially are dependent on the coca production, and the government right now is breaking the peace accords and eradicating illegally the coca and spraying it with glyphosate. So it is in the interests of a lot of people, also in the global north, to keep coca illegal and to keep marijuana illegal. Even though the USA and Canada, they already have universities producing a lot of knowledge on how to produce cannabis and how to produce marijuana, it is still illegal in our countries. So yes, I think that legalization could be a way to reduce some of the criminality that is happening right now, especially in Colombia with the Mexican cartels and all that stuff. I don't think it's anywhere near the future because it's a huge, huge, huge business keeping it illegal, also for the pesticides, for the eradications governments, for the military efforts that all this circus of illegality comes with. So yeah, I don't see it happening anytime soon. I would like to see it, but it's not very probable.
Okay, thank you, Minerva. No sé si Richard tienes algo por decir sobre eso.
Sí, sencillo nomás que yo creo que el problema de las plantas sagradas es la industrialización, justamente, porque nuestros pueblos originarios se curan con eso. Justo ahora nuestra Amazonía ecuatoriana está con su medicina. Estamos hablando de tabaco, estamos hablando de en alguna parte coca. Nosotros no somos productores de coca en Ecuador, pero estamos hablando de medicina como la ayahuasca, entre otras cosas que son las que están defendiendo a estos sectores. Así que yo creo que hay que dejarlas donde tienen que estar, que es la medicina ancestral, medicina de nuestros pueblos originarios y que pueden compartirla con los demás. Pero el problema de todo esto siempre es la industrialización. Solo eso.
Just quickly on the question of sacred plants, the problem with sacred plants is their industrialization. Indigenous people in the Ecuadorian Amazon also use different sacred plants, tobacco and ayahuasca is another. It's not a big region for coca production, but those people defend the use of these plants, and these plants should be left with these people for those uses and to be shared by these people in those terms. The problem is when industrialization happens.
Gracias, Richard. Thomas. So I think that is, if I'm not mistaken, all of the questions that we have received. Unless, Alba, there's anything that I am missing.
No, that's everything.
And I think we are also pretty close to the end of our time. Is that right?
Yes.
So I suppose there isn't much left to do except to thank our panelists. But I suppose just, I mean, to put a comment, you know, more generally, I think that you know, Latin America is many things to many people, but you know, one thing that I think we can take from this is that spirit of resistance, that spirit of solidarity, that spirit of coming together in the worst of times, and this is certainly one of the worst of times. And you know, much as both Minerva and Richard have highlighted here, that's something that's as much I think a core to Latin America as some of the other darker sides of it, and that spirit that comes from and runs right through society and right through the region is what would give, I think, anyone hope in even in this dark time. Those things that give less hope, I suppose, would be it's easy to point our fingers at the governments of those countries, and there are, you know, there aren't many, I think, that could be said to be doing a great job in this current context, although that is certainly not confined to Latin America. But I think the other thing that I think both Richard and Minerva have sort of brought home is that when we in Europe or else other parts of what's often referred to as the developed world, and when we talk about those governments or the governance there, you know, I think Latin America is a mirror for Europe that we need to be looking at, because much of what we have and enjoy here and consider to be our developed status has its roots in Latin America, in its riches, in its people, in its culture, in its food. And so we owe a huge debt that we don't necessarily pay in any shape or form. So I think that's really just to say that, and to say once again, thank you. I think throughout this conversation tonight, again, thank Karen in York for doing her translations as on the chat, but also we put some links to some crowdfunding campaigns organized by or on behalf of grassroots organizations in Latin America through different organizations participating this evening on behalf of the Farmers Brigades, on behalf of human rights and environmental rights defenders in Colombia, to help with issues of water in coal-producing regions. And so all of those I think you'll find there, and I'm sure that the websites of both FECOL and RICO are also, I think they're available on the Facebook page on the event.
Yes, regarding that, I just want to remind you all that this webinar has been recorded, so we will be we will upload it on YouTube, and we will add also the links for both co-founders, and you can follow them on Facebook, on Instagram, and on Twitter. You can find them as Red de Iniciativas Comunitarias RICO and Movimiento Nacional Campesino FECAOL. But in any case, we will tag them so you can track them or to keep in contact with them. And also, if you have just a little time, it would be amazing if you can give us some feedback. I put it on the chat box, but in any case, I will put it also, I will send you to everyone who registered. So I just want to say from LASC, thank you very much, Minerva. Thank you very much, Richard. Ha sido impresionante teneros. Ha sido muy, muy interesante. Muchísimas gracias por vuestro tiempo. Thank you very much for your time. Thank you very much also our founders, IrishAid. We are doing this webinar also because of them. So yes, that's all on my side. I hope you all enjoy it. It was really interesting, and I would like to keep talking like for 1 more hour, but I understand that it's it's late. Also here, I'm in Spain right now, and it's even later. So yeah, have a good evening, and that's everything on my side. If Minerva, Richard, si queréis decir algo para despediros antes de que cerremos.
No, solo muchas gracias a ustedes. Ha sido lindo compartir hoy con todos y todas. Así que cuenten con nosotros para cualquier cosa. Hacen un lindo trabajo desde LASC. Esta unidad con Latinoamérica siempre ha sido importante y bueno, nos conocemos hace mucho tiempo y espero seguirnos viendo siempre. Un abrazo y cuídense mucho y muchas bendiciones que las necesitamos ahora.
Sí, muchísimas gracias, Richard. Igualmente.
So Richard was just saying that just thank you to everybody. It's great to be here to share with you all. And we're here, we will be here again for more collaborations in the future. And thanks to LASC, has been important in the past. And we look forward to continued collaborations, and take care, everybody. We need you all fit and well.
Yeah, I think thank you so much for inviting us. Thank you so much for giving us this platform. Thank you so much for loving Latin America. I mean, we love it because we were both there, but yeah, I think it's really nice to see that yeah, European mindsets are opening up a little bit to other perspectives. And I'm not talking about mine, I'm talking about the people who do the resistance every day. And I think that this is it's going to be a long way, but I'm pretty sure that it's now or never that we are going to have to change our form of view. Gracias, Richard. Aprendí muchísimo y espero que podamos seguir en contacto.
Pues I think we can closure the webinar. Thank you all again. Muchas gracias de nuevo. Creo que ya podemos darlo por clausurado. Thank you very much, Karen, for translating Minerva's part on the chat. And thank you all who keep track of the webinar and for your questions and everything. So thank you very much, and see you soon. Bye.